Welcome back to another episode of The Edge. I am Malorie Sugar, and I am your host today. The Edge is a show where we discuss important issues that teens may face today. Today, we will be talking about domestic violence. 40% of teenage girls know someone their age that has been physically assaulted by their boyfriend or girlfriend, yet less than 25% of those teens say that they have discussed dating violence with their parents. In addition, 1 in 4 teens have also admitted that they have been called names, harassed, or have been put down by their partner through calls and text messages. Today, I am joined with Allison Weakland from Domestic Violence Services of Southwestern PA. Ms. Weakland has been working with them for 11 years in a variety of departments, including education and training, transitional housing, legal advocacy, and the Safe House. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So to start out for the viewers, what is the difference between abusive relationships and toxic relationships? Because we talked about that earlier.
Right. So if we say the word toxic, that could mean just a variety of unhealthy behaviors that maybe you're experiencing with a friend or a family member or even a dating partner. But even though they're unhealthy, they may not be doing those things with the intent of having power and control over their partner. So when we're talking about an abusive person, they are with knowledge and intent doing unhealthy things to get power and control over their partner.
Okay, so in abusive, do you mean physically abusive, also verbally abusive, like any of that?
All of the above.
Okay.
So we're talking physical abuse, verbal and emotional abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, and digital abuse, with kind of deals with technology and using that against your partner.
So not just romantic relationships can be abusive. What other relationships can be abusive?
So if we're specifically talking about domestic violence or dating violence, we're talking either a family member or someone that you're dating.
Okay.
Of course, friendships can be unhealthy, but they wouldn't necessarily fall in the category of what we deal with, which is domestic violence.
Gotcha. So how are these relationships formed?
Well, they start off usually like any other relationship, because to be honest, if you went on a first date with someone and they hit you, or they called you a name, or they were just not nice at all, you probably wouldn't go on that second date.
Not likely.
Yeah, exactly. So they're usually actually very nice, and actually I find that victims usually tell me that when they first met their partner, that it felt like they found the greatest person ever. Like they were so excited that this person wanted to be with them and date them, and then it's usually after a little bit of time has gone by and some trust, although not real trust, has been built, that you start to see more of the abusive signs.
Gotcha. So why do people stay in these relationships if they're being abused?
Because it's so difficult to get out, for one. There's safety issues. There's also practical issues to getting out, especially if we're talking about teenagers. You know, for adults, it can be a little bit easier because generally you may not work with that person, you may not already live with that person, so to cut ties it becomes a little bit easier. But if you're a teen and you go to school with them, it's a little bit more difficult to actually get away from that person. And then there's the idea that I think people don't remember that, once again, what is abuse? It's power and control over someone. That person has that control. They've made them feel like the victim, that it's their fault. That if they're better, the relationship will get better. That if they break up with them, no one else will want them. So it's also having that kind of like mind control over them. So that's what kind of makes it difficult to get out. And then feeling like no one will believe you or help you if you want to leave that person.
What services does the company provide, like for people that need to get out?
So specifically for teens, we have a couple of options. If they're 18 and older, they could certainly utilize the Safe House, but we find most teens don't need that specific service. So what we do have is one-on-one counseling, which we call empowerment counseling. And the really cool thing about that is the teens are in charge of that counseling service. So when they come to see me, it's not like they lay on a couch and I'm like, okay, I want you to tell me this, this, and this.
Yeah.
You know, I say, what do you want to tell me? What is off limits? You know, they're totally in control of that session. And it's free and it's confidential. And if they're 14 and older, they can sign for their own services, which means they don't need parental permission. And their confidentiality will be protected unless it falls under mandated reporting. Which I can explain that as well. But basically, because their confidentiality is protected, very similar to an adult, they don't have to worry about me calling their parent and saying like, hey, do you know your son or daughter got services, or calling the school or anything like that.
So what is
mandated reporting? Yes. So that's something that my agency is, if I know a child is being abused by an adult, that I have to call CYS and report that. Okay. Now, in terms of teens, if they're coming to me to talk about a parent or a guardian, that's something where I'd have to explain to them, depending on what you tell me, I may have to make a CYS report. And I put that on the table right away, because I don't want anyone to feel like I'm tricking them. So I explain to them that's what I absolutely have to report. But if they're coming to me about a dating relationship, a boyfriend or girlfriend, that actually is not mandated for me to report if they're being abused by a peer that they're dating. So that would remain confidential.
I mean, are you allowed to like maybe, well, if they're older than 14, I guess not, but tell someone that, hey, this person is being physically abused, because that's not okay? Like, are you allowed to tell anybody, or because of the confidentiality, if they're older than 14, you can't?
If they're older than 14 and it's coming from their dating partner that's obviously within a certain age range, I do not have to tell anyone. Now, obviously, I'm going to work with them to tell trusted adults, but their confidentiality is, protected. I don't have to call CYS. I don't have to call the school. I don't have to call their parents.
What is some advice you give to those teens?
Well, first and foremost, we safety plan, because obviously, I might be concerned about their physical safety. So we talk about things that they can do when their partner gets angry and they're with them. If they've decided to break up with them, we talk about safety planning while they're at school, while they're at their after-school jobs, just different things that they can do to maintain their safety. But then we also talk about what wasn't healthy about that relationship and what is in a healthy relationship, so they don't keep repeating that pattern. Because oftentimes if someone has experienced an abusive relationship, they can very easily fall into that pattern of being in an abusive relationship one after another.
And that affects someone for the rest of their life.
Exactly.
So what is also some advice you would give to like break that cycle? Like if someone has been a multiple time, like offender or not offender.
Right. Education. Education is the key. Learning about why you might have ended up in that relationship, how that relationship worked. A lot of victims might feel like, oh, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I end up in these relationships. But it's not, you're not stupid. It's, there's abusive people are very good at what they do. So we educate about how the power and control works and how that can get you stuck. But then we also talk about, what does it mean to be in a healthy relationship, and what are those skills, and working on building those skills. So not only can they identify when someone's being abusive, but when they meet a nice person, that they know actually how to build a healthy relationship with them.
And does the education stop at just the counseling, or do you do more services to educate like the kids?
So outside the direct service, which is like, the one-on-one counseling, we also have, forgot to mention it, but we also have a support group for teens as well at the Common Ground Teen Center once a month. And so beyond those direct services, we also have our education and training department. And so we go into high schools and we offer basically presentations about teen dating violence. So we talk about warning signs, how to help a friend, and obviously about our services and how to access them.
So what ages do you go, what schools do you go into, like for specific age ranges or any age?
So any age, actually, and they're all age appropriate. So our youngest program that we have is called Hands Are Not for Hitting. And so we'll go into like Head Start programs and like the kids will make their handprints, and we'll talk about what are helpful things that you do with your hands, what are bad things you wouldn't want to do with your hands. And then it progresses from there. When we go to school age kids, we have a series of programs called Connected and Respected, where we don't specifically talk about abuse, but we try to teach some of those healthy relationship things. So healthy communication, problem solving skills, how to show respect. And then once we hit junior high and high school, that's when we want to start talking about teen dating violence.
How can one come about these services? Like, can a student go to a teacher and say, hey, I want to do this, would be a good idea, or go to the principal, or do principals or usually like superintendents usually come to you with, hey, can you come in?
Actually, it's usually us kind of you know, contacting the
Yeah.
schools, you know, saying, hey, we have these programs. They're absolutely free, you know, so, and we're flexible with our scheduling. Please let us come in and talk to the students. But certainly I always encourage students, parents, teachers to kind of be ambassadors for us, you know, because teen dating violence is a difficult subject. Not everybody's comfortable talking about it. I think sometimes it can make schools nervous, and what if the parents come back and say something? So I think having students and parents as ambassadors saying like, hey, I think this is really important for you to have these educational programs in your school. Please invite this agency in. I know they do school programs. I know they're free. Please, we want our kids to have this educational opportunity.
How long has Domestic Violence Services of Southwestern PA done this, like the presentations?
Well, I've been there 11 years, and they've been
yeah.
doing that ever since I've been around, but I know it was even previous to that. I'm not sure of the exact how long we've been doing it, but it's been at least for 11 plus years.
And in your time working there, how have you seen like violent relationships change, like through with society and different age groups?
Well, I mean, the scary thing about, in terms of age groups and why we've been expanding our services to teens and trying to reach out to teens more, is when we talk about domestic violence relationships, we have 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men experiencing some form of domestic violence in their relationships. With teens, it's 1 in 3. And notice we don't separate boys and girls, and it's because their victim rates are practically even. So between, obviously things are getting worse and are not getting better. Plus with technology, and going back to talking about digital abuse, I think that's really big among the teen age group of not realizing how that's being used against them, possibly by a partner. And obviously the adults, you know, the technology, that's not something we grew up with. And we're kind of learning with you guys, and you guys probably know a whole lot more about it than we do. So to be able to talk about that and talk about safety and how it can be used against you, I just don't think adults are really comfortable because they're not even 100% sure of how everything works. So that's something else that, like, trying to keep up on all the technology trends. So I'm able to talk to teens, especially when we're safety planning and talking about the dangers of technology. It's a lot to keep up with, but it's really important.
I was actually just about to ask that. You're one step ahead of me. So how can you prevent, like with technology and everything being an up and coming like new thing with our generation, how do you prevent that? Well,
the biggest thing I talk to teens about is I found that they're very open with their passwords. That it's a very common thing in relationships that, yes, my boyfriend or girlfriend has my passwords to everything. And I'm like, why? And often they'll say, well, how can they trust me if they don't know, like, who I'm talking to and who's posting on my page, you know, and all these things. And I'm like, because that's what trust is. You just trust someone. It's not because they're checking up on you. So this idea of that you're allowed to have privacy and that you don't need to share your passwords or let them check your phone. You know, it's another big thing. Like, let me go through your text messages. Let me see your email, you know, whatever, going through your laptop or your iPad or whatever it is, that's not okay, and that's a form of control, and that's not how a healthy relationship functions.
And not just with social media, but how do like movies and TV shows play into saying like into these relationships?
I think sometimes movies and television, even lyrics and music and music videos, I think that sometimes they can normalize violent behavior, especially in intimate relationships, that when we see it happen in real life, it almost doesn't affect us, or we toss it off. Well, that's not a big deal. That kind of happens all the time because it's been normalized, but it's not normal, and it's not healthy. You know, it shouldn't be going on in relationships. But I think movies, TV, music, media can desensitize us to what is healthy and what is not.
So how can we all work together, like, to not sensitize us, to maybe unsensitize us that this isn't okay? Like, we need to help people.
So we always encourage, if you see something, say something. The problem can be is you do have to judge, is this a safe time for you to say something? Because depending on how volatile the situation is, it may not be safe for you to necessarily jump into a situation. So always make sure that before you jump in that you feel safe doing that. But, you know, even if you can't say anything in the moment, if you say something to the victim or the abuser later saying like, hey, I noticed you fighting with your partner and that's not okay. That's not how relationships should be. And just bringing that to their attention. And then getting involved with our agency. You know, we're always looking for volunteers or people to hold drives for us. Or to, like we talked earlier about being ambassadors. So any way that, you know, people can get involved with helping us end this problem, because we do believe that we can work ourselves out of a job, but it has to be more than just the people in my agency. We need our communities to get involved with ending the problem as well.
Who can volunteer?
Anybody. I mean, it depends on what type of project or how long you want to volunteer with us. If you want to be a consistent long-term volunteer and you want to work directly with clients, they have to go through volunteer training. But if they want to do a service project or a drive or do some like yard work or stuff at our admin office, you don't necessarily have to be trained. You just have to work with our volunteer coordinator to set up a day and figure out what projects need done.
What does the training entail for those that may be interested?
So it's called JARS, and it's I can't remember how many weeks it is. I can get that information to you, but it is a several-week training where it educates about domestic violence as well as how in a proper, healthy way to assist a domestic violence victim. And then once you complete that training, then you go to all our different offices and sites and you get a chance to see how each site operates. And then from there, the volunteer decides where they might like to work best. So then they kind of start doing on-site training specific to whatever department they chose to work in.
Now, depending on the project, could I even, because I'm under 18, would I be able to help and volunteer, or do you have to be a specific age?
I think it might be 18 and older to do the long-term volunteering, but we do have high school students do projects with us all the time and volunteer their time in that way.
Okay. So earlier we talked about the Safe House. What is the Safe House and how do people utilize it?
So the Safe House is basically just a house that we've converted into a shelter type residency. So it's not just one big room. And really the only difference to our house versus the houses that, you know, a student might live in is we have offices there because we do have staff there 24/7. But basically it's for adults or adults with children that are fleeing a domestic violence situation that has left them homeless. So they can come into the Safe House and not only have a safe place to stay, but have a place that's away from the abusive person.
Okay. Can teenagers come, or do you have to be 18?
If they're coming by themselves, they have to be 18 and older. But we do have teens that come with their mothers.
Okay. So how has the Safe House helped those? How have you seen that personally?
I think just having that opportunity to not only obviously be physically safe because you're away from an abusive partner, but when you're in an abusive relationship, it gets very confusing, very tiring, and it gets hard to think and to plan your next move. And I think what the Safe House offers is a break from all of that and a chance to catch your breath, along with having healthy people there that will kind of support you in deciding what you want to do next.
Gotcha. So moving on to a different note, how can teachers help their students if they see them with an abusive relationship, maybe after school, they've seen them, or even in class?
Similar to what I was saying before, if you see something, say something. Probably not always best to say something to the couple together. You know, it's better to definitely with the victim approach them separately, but also you can talk to the abusive partner too. And once again, pointing out the behaviors and talking about how they're not healthy and how it's not right and how it won't be tolerated in school. And also getting them connected with services, but also remaining not judgmental and not trying to take control over the situation. Because I feel like adults, with the best of intentions, especially with younger people, it's like, I'll tell you what you need to do, and they start rattling off all these plans. But it's really important, just like we do with adult clients, to empower teens to make their own decisions in regards to the relationship and what type of services they decide to seek or not seek, but just keep providing the information and continue to be just a positive reinforcement in their life can actually make a huge difference and make them feel comfortable. If you're not, you have to do this, you have to do this, that they'll actually feel more comfortable coming and talking to you.
What signs can teachers look out for? Because I know students are different in the way they behave around their friends and their family and teachers. So what are some signs?
Well, I think another hard thing with teens is I think sometimes the behaviors are kind of thrown off as they're being teenagers.
Yeah.
But I think if you know your students pretty well, you have a baseline for each of them. And so what you want to look for is deviations from their normal behavior. So if they're like a straight A student and now they're barely getting C's, warning sign. You know, if they were someone that was really involved in school activities and now you notice them quitting all of them for no particular reason. If they were once a bright, happy, peppy student and now they look withdrawn and tired all the time, warning sign. So you just want to take what you know about them already and see what kind of differences that you're seeing, and not just assume that, well, they're a teen, they're probably just going through teen things, you know, that there actually might be a serious teen dating violence issue there.
Is that similar to ways parents, like the things they can look out for too?
Yeah, absolutely. You know your kid, you know what they're like, you know what they're into, you know roughly what their behaviors are like. If you start to see that change, and especially if that's corresponding with the time that they started dating someone, there you go, you have the warning signs that something's probably not right in that relationship.
So I'm sure there's been instances where kids aren't believed by their parents. What can they do to maybe get their parents' trust? Say, hey, this is happening, I need help.
I always strongly suggest, if they feel comfortable, to give us a call and do like an empowerment session with me or talk to me on the hotline, because sometimes what I'll do is then once we kind of build a relationship and we've kind of talked about the relationship, we'll invite the parent or guardian into the next session and I'll kind of mediate, which can definitely help open up the lines of communication and get the parent to understand that this isn't something that they're overreacting about, that this is a serious situation and, you know, it's important that they believe and support their child.
And is this something that can be maybe not prevented, but you can be warned about? Because are there certain characteristics in a person that maybe make you think, oh, this isn't healthy, like from the get-go? Right.
So obviously if they're controlling or possessive in any way, if you hear things from their previous relationships, sometimes those are easy to, you know, go, oh, it's the crazy ex, like they don't know what they're talking about, or they're just mad because they're not with that person anymore. But that could actually, you know, they could be telling the truth about, you know, what happened in that relationship. Any indication of violent behaviors or aggressive behaviors, so maybe you haven't heard of them hitting a partner, but maybe you've seen them punch a locker or break something in a classroom or something where you see that they have a lot of, you know, aggressive behaviors, that could also be a warning sign. Also, just not respecting boundaries, which sometimes can look like a nice thing. So, you know, my big example is like you're going out on your first date and they show up with like an expensive piece of jewelry as like a first date gift. And it's like, that doesn't really match up with first date and where you're at in the relationship, even though that seems like a really nice thing. That's not a really good boundary to have on a first date, of offering an expensive piece of jewelry to someone that, you know, you're just meeting and going out. So even nice things, if they don't seem appropriate for where you're at in the relationship, could be a warning sign.
And what are some things as a peer? Because I know, like I earlier said, you act differently around your peers, your family, your teachers. What are some signs that may be different set aside from those?
Well, you as someone's friend are more likely to see more specific behaviors than parents or teachers. So we talked about things like, you know, grades dropping out of activities, you know, things like that. But as a friend, you may actually see some of the physical altercations, or you may see some of the text messages, or you may notice that your friend's really upset after they read a text or a message from a partner. And they may even tell you a little bit about, oh, you know, they're calling me names. You know, you might get more details as a friend. And as a friend, similar to an adult, you want to keep, this isn't healthy, you don't deserve this isn't your fault. And just keep repeating those things and encouraging them to speak to an adult, whether that's us, their parents, someone here at the school that they trust, because I think hearing it from a peer has more of an impact than necessarily it coming from a teacher or a parent or even me.
And say if I had a friend who maybe needed help and I went to their parent and they got mad, what are some ways to like try to explain why I did it, you need help?
You could say, you know, I was really concerned for your safety. You know, I've tried talking about it with you, but you weren't really open to it, and I get it. You're scared. You don't want to think that your relationship is bad, but I had to make a judgment choice, and I really felt like your safety was in jeopardy, and I had to go to an adult. And they still may not understand, which is unfortunate, but sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. Sometimes, and it's not unusual, clients get mad at me sometimes for some of the things I have to do. I know sometimes they get mad at their parents, teachers. You know, I think they feel like they're doing a really good job of hiding what's happening in their relationship, and the fact that other people see it and notice it, it's embarrassing, it's scary, and so it's very common for them to get defensive and upset.
So that's a normal emotion a lot of people feel.
Exactly, yeah.
So how can you help them maybe realize, like, you shouldn't be embarrassed, it's not your fault, you did need help and you're getting help?
Just keep repeating that, which I know sounds silly, but if you think about it, an abusive person is repeating constantly the other things. This is all your fault. I wouldn't have to do this if you would have done that. And they're saying it to them verbally, they're sending it in text messages, you know, they're leaving messages, you know, on Facebook or Snapchat. I mean, there's constantly feeding them that negative information. And so for everyone on the other side trying to help them, it's like you have to keep repeating the positive information and keep encouraging them to leave the relationship or to seek help to leave the relationship.
So what are some steps maybe to try and get out of the relationship?
I always suggest either calling us on the hotline, talking to an adult, because while the ultimate goal is to get a person out of that relationship, the most dangerous time for a person in an abusive relationship is actually while they're trying to leave and in the weeks and months after leaving that person. So sometimes leaving right away isn't necessarily the safest way to do it. So we just always encourage a victim to get help from someone, whether our agency or adult, to do a safety plan to figure out what is the safest way. So for example, don't break up, you know, alone at your house or their house. You know, go out in public, go to a coffee shop, go to the mall, go somewhere in public. So, you know, hopefully they'll be less likely to do anything because they are in a public place. But if they do start to do something, there's plenty of people there to intervene and help keep you safe.
Gotcha. Well, that looks like it's all the time we have for today. Thank you again for coming. For anyone that encounters an abusive relationship or knows someone in a bad situation like the ones we have discussed today, contact any of the numbers with Domestic Violence Services of Southwestern PA. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in on The Edge, and we'll see you next time.